Hello and welcome. It's been a very long time since I've made a video, but I guess here we are. The reason why I'm making this video is because of a new game that came out recently called Thymesia. What is this game? Well, Thymesia is a Souls-like game that was released on August 19 on PC and console. Now, what surprised me the most is that this game was created by an indie development team called Overborder Studios, which is based out of Taiwan. Now, they only have 7, yes, just 7 developers, and Thymesia was their first game as a team, and honestly, they did a fantastic job with this game. The game is well made, and it's solid. The gameplay, for the most part, is tight and responsive, although there are a few areas where it could be improved, and that is exactly why I'm making this video, to not only review the game, but also to provide some sort of constructive feedback for the developers. So, is Thymesia the best Souls-like game? Let's find out. So what is Thymesia exactly? So it is described as a Souls-like game by the studio that made it, by the Steam homepage, and pretty much everywhere else you can see. But yet still, that is an understatement, because this game is almost identical to your standard Souls games, like Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Sekiro, from both a visual perspective, but also from a gameplay perspective as well. So, you know how in each Souls game, it is based off of a certain art style or element? So for example, in Dark Souls, it's all about fire. So you have things like Lords of Fire, Embers, and Cinders. And in Bloodborne, you just have blood. That's literally the entire game. So Thymesia is all about alchemy, and it really hones in on the art style, which does have some similarity to Bloodborne, but it puts more emphasis on the plague or plagues and the witch doctor aspect. Now the similarities don't stop there. It extends into the gameplay as well, and I don't mean that lightly. So let's go through the mechanics of the game. So let's start off with the tutorial mission, because I think that's the best place to begin. So when you first start the game, you will be within that tutorial mission, and honestly, it's actually done quite well. It will teach you the basics of the game in a relatively isolated and controlled setting. So it'll teach you things like how to attack, how to parry, dodge, and interrupt, amongst many other things. But seeing as how this game is a almost perfect replica of a typical Souls game, it has all the functionalities that you would expect. There is one problem I want to mention. So if you've finished the game, like I have, and you want to start a new game on a new save slot, then you'll have to go through the tutorial section again. But that's not the problem. It's the incredibly annoying tutorial messages that pop up and completely stops the flow of the game. The only way to get rid of the message is to spam the escape key, and there is no option in the menu to turn off the tutorials permanently. And the same thing also applies when you're exploring the map and you are being followed by tons of enemies. If you come across a pickup and you go to pick it up, for about a second you can't even close the message window even if you spam the escape key. And I find this to be possibly the most annoying thing in this game, and I'm sure most people will feel the same way. Hence why I wanted to let everyone know. So while you're going through the tutorial missions, you will be defeating basic enemies and a couple of bosses or mini bosses. And just like every other Souls games, you will acquire currency that you can use to level up your character by increasing one of 3 stats: strength, vitality, and plague. So already the game doesn't really have a lot of stats to choose from compared to other Souls games where they give you a ton of stats and you can basically create a build that suits your playstyle. So if you want to be a spell warrior that has spell in one hand and you want to be a melee character, you can do that. Or if you want to be a full spellcaster, you can do that as well. Or if you want to be more of that hunter type that uses an arrow and a bow, you can do that too. However, in this game, you are pretty much stuck with being a melee warrior, similar to how it is in Sekiro. So if you have played Sekiro in the past, this game will feel right at home. At least that's the common sentimentality around this game anyway. So as you're progressing through a given map or a given level, you will come across beacons that you can light up that serve as your rest area, and they work exactly like your bonfire or a Bloodborne lantern. But this game does something that is much better than FromSoft games, you can do literally everything while at the beacon. So things like leveling up, upgrading your potions, modifying your talent build, unlocking and upgrading your plague weapons, and pretty much everything in between. All of which I'll go through a bit later on, but it is something that I really love about this game. So I really want to give a big thank you to the developers for really not wasting the player's time with unnecessary load screens, like it is in Dark Souls and Bloodborne. Then, once you reach the end of the tutorial mission, you will then have to fight your first boss. And if you've played Elden Ring before, this boss functions exactly the same, where you are meant to lose to him. Now, you can take down his first health bar, which will give you a achievement or a trophy. However, it will put you in the exact same cutscene as if you lost the fight, which will then cause you to wake up in the main hub, and then you can then start the game from there. So let's talk about the hub and what purpose does it serve in this game. So let's talk about the hub. Now initially, once you first get here, there is not much you can do other than to explore around a little bit, get a bit more exposition on the story, and eventually as you progress through the game, you will then be able to level up, upgrade and unlock your plague weapons, your potions, and everything in between, which is the same thing you can do at a beacon, so there's nothing too special about the hub. The reason why the hub exists is that it allows you to start a new mission. Now, unlike Souls games where you are within a massive world, where you can travel from one area to the other while on foot or by teleporting, this game is primarily based around small, bite-sized missions that take place at various locations. These missions are actually quite linear and fully self-contained. In most cases, there are 2 beacons to each mission, but in some cases, there's only 1 beacon because in that one particular mission, there's only the boss fight, so something for you to keep in mind. Now personally, I am not too opposed to this idea and I think it works quite well for this game. Now, what I would have liked seeing is a mission dedicated to each boss in a given map, allowing you to go back and just fight those bosses only instead of having to clear the map all over again or just trying to traverse the map all over again. And I really do hope that they implement this sometime in the future, because at first I was very frustrated with the bosses because they are quite difficult. This game heavily does revolve around the parry mechanic. However, once I got used to the game, I actually really wanted to keep going back and practice and get better at the game and fight those bosses again and again. But the fact that I have to keep clearing the map or traversing the map every single time honestly actually keeps me away from having to redo this game or replay this game. I want to briefly talk about the level design in this game and how the progression throughout each level works. So the level design of this game is very linear, more so than any other Souls games I've played, as I've said before. And that is because each level is its own individual experience. So overall it took me about 8 hours in total to complete every single mission and defeat all bosses in the game, while actively trying to explore as much as I could. So I guess you could see the game is not really that long. However, this game is mostly focused on the boss fights, and that's where the most amount of fun you will experience. But having said all that, while it is linear, it is somewhat possible to get lost in a few different levels. And this is because the game does not really tell you where you have to go, just like every other Souls games. And honestly, I really like that aspect of the Souls games. I want to have the incentive to explore. I don't want to be told where I have to go and what I have to do. I like to just be able to just explore areas, look at new things, and if I discover something new, that's great, but if I don't, that's fine with me as well. That's all part of the experience. And I think this game does that quite well, whilst being relatively linear. Now, when you do finish a mission or a main mission on a given map, you will then unlock sub-quests that you can do, but they are optional. These sub-quests take place in the same level you've just finished, however you will be progressing through the map in a different way. So for example, you might be going backwards in one of the sub-quests, whereas another one, you might be limited to a certain portion of the map, but it has new hazards or new enemy placements and maybe a new path for you to explore. But that's neither here nor there. I really want to talk about the combat because, let's be honest, that's what everyone cares about. So let's get into the combat, which is by far the best part of the game and where most of the effort has been done. And it is very, very obvious. Now, if I had to describe the combat at a very basic level, it is very similar to Sekiro, a little bit of God of War, and a little bit of Witcher 3 as well. So what do I mean by that? Well, as I said, the game features only 3 stats that you can level up. Strength, which increases the amount of damage you do with your normal attacks. Vitality, which simply increases your health. And Plague, which is a new mechanic that I haven't seen in a Souls game before. Now, the problem with that is that it leaves little to no room for different builds, other than playing a melee-focused warrior. However, there is actually a bit of variety with how you play as a melee character, and I will get to that shortly. So, at the very basic level, the very basic combat level, you will notice that there is no stamina in the game. You can sprint, dodge, and attack as much as you want without having to worry about exhaustion. That is because the game puts heavy emphasis on fast-paced combat, whereas games like Dark Souls and Bloodborne actually feel relatively slow compared to Thymesia. Not that it's a bad thing. Now, because you can attack as much as you want, the game is balanced around that, and enemies and bosses provide small opening windows where you must take advantage. So you can't just sit there and keep spamming your attacks because enemies don't get staggered. Well, if they do, it's very rare, at least from your normal attacks anyways. Whereas you can get staggered with pretty much every single hit. So you are effectively a glass cannon. So effectively the game is focused around high level gameplay where you take little to no damage. And any damage that you would have taken, you either dodge that, you either interrupt that, or especially you parry that. Because parry has multiple benefits for you, which I'll get to in a minute. So overall the combat is relatively straightforward, however it still manages to be very different from other Souls games. Now the first way that this game is different to other Souls games is that each enemy in the game has 2 health bars. The first one is shown in white, and the other is shown in this sort of cerulean color, which is called the wound bar. So when you attack an enemy with your normal combos, you'll inflict damage to their white health bar, leaving behind wounds on the enemy. If you don't attack them for a small period of time, they will regenerate that missing health, and then you'll have to get rid of the white health bar all over again. Now, in order to damage that wounds bar, you can only do it through one ability, which is called the claw attack. The entire reason this ability exists is to damage the wound bar. So already you have this sort of awesome intricate system where you have to balance out your offensive combos while also reducing their wound bar by weaving in the claw attack as much as you can. Now you could go crazy and basically remove all of their white health, then if you aren't able to attack them for a short duration, they will heal their entire health bar. And I have to say that I really like this system. It's very unique from any other Souls games I've played, and it still manages to make combat more fun by adding this small micromanagement system, without it being too clunky or anything. In terms of defensive abilities, you have your dodge, your parry, and interrupt. The interrupt functions exactly the same like in Bloodborne, or the Bloodborne gun parry mechanic. However, the normal parry, the one that you do with your weapon, is the same as in Sekiro. Now the great thing about the parry system in this game is that when you parry, you will indirectly do damage to the enemy's white health bar, which will then expose their wounds bar. So basically, even while you're playing defensively, you are still inflicting damage to the enemy, which keeps the pacing of the game really fast. And there's really never a dull moment. And after having played through this game, I rarely ever use dodge, as not only is it a bit of a clunky ability, it doesn't really work that well, it's just not really fun to use. However, the parry is just so damn good and so beneficial for you that it's not really worth using anything else. I mean, think about it. You're doing damage with your combos. You then do a couple of claw attacks to do damage to their wounds bar. Then the enemy or the boss goes on the offensive, and now you are required to parry their attacks. The more attacks you parry, the more indirect damage you inflict. And after they finish attacking, you can then go in for a couple more claw attacks to further reduce their health. It's this consistent back and forth with little to no downtime in between that makes the combat in this game so damn good. I mean, seriously, you have to try it. Now, in addition to the parry mechanic, you also have an interrupt mechanic as well, which I honestly rarely ever used. It works exactly the same as your gun parry from Bloodborne. The difference is that in this game, the interrupt is only used when an enemy goes for an unblockable attack, which is shown as a bright green flash. So if you've played Doom Eternal before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now let's move on to the plague weapons, or just the plague stat in general. What are they? Well, plague is your third stat, which increases the amount of wound damage you inflict on the enemy with your claw attack, but it also serves as an energy system, similar to Magicka in Dark Souls, which allows you to use a variety of plague weapons, each with their own unique animation set. Now the plague energy is shown as a cerulean bar underneath your health bar. The more you attack an enemy or the more you parry, the more energy you will regenerate. It's a system literally designed to reward you for playing flawlessly. So how does it work? Well, at the beginning of the game, you won't have any plague weapons of your own. However, you can steal an enemy's weapon temporarily by charging up your claw attack and then absorbing the weapon your enemy is carrying. However, this can only be used once before you need to do the ability again and absorb their weapon again. But that system is only temporary, because throughout the game you will come across sort of mini bosses that, when defeated, will drop weapon shards based on the weapon that they are carrying. And there are a lot of enemy types and plague weapons, trust me on that. So, for example, you come across a mini-boss that carries a greatsword, and after defeating him, you will then acquire the greatsword skill points. Then when you're at the hub or at the beacon, you can then use the shards to unlock the greatsword plague weapon, and then assign it to your character. Then any future skill shards you collect will allow you to upgrade that specific weapon even further, either by increasing its damage, reducing its cooldown, or by adding an additional attack to the combo. So already you have tons of options with not only what type of plague weapons to choose, but how to progress those weapons further, which kind of requires you to grind a little bit, but to be honest, it's not that bad. For the entire game, I personally used the hammer and then switched over to the greatsword, as both of those plague weapons have a guaranteed knockdown or stagger, which is unbelievably helpful, as most enemies in this game can't be staggered through normal attacks. However, you do have a lot of variety based on your playstyle. I mean, there's even a few ranged plague weapons like the bow, or a few defensive ones that allow you to place a damage absorption shield on you. So it all depends on how you want to play. So I would just suggest that if you do decide to pick up this game, just play around with a variety of different plague weapons as you unlock them and just see how you go. So basically, plague weapons allow you to slightly alter the game depending on your playstyle, but that's not all, because this game has a talent points system, which is why I said that it's somewhat familiar if you've played God of War 2018 before. So let's talk about the talent system. This is where you can truly make a build to suit your playstyle and your chosen plague weapon. So each time you level up, you will gain a set amount of talent points you can use. There's quite a few talents for you to choose from for almost every part of the game. Offensive, parrying, interrupting, buffing your claw weapon, your claw attack, and just everything in between. And in some cases, you can only pick one tree or the other. Now, I mostly focused on making my parries easier to perform, and having those parries do more damage to the enemy, and on top of that, basically buffing up my normal combos. This particular build that I went with allowed me to stay in the thick of the fight without having to retreat or use my dodge at all, because I personally love using the parry system regardless of the game, and it feels way more rewarding to use it as compared to dodging because of that indirect damage incentive. So honestly, there's not much else to say with the talents. It's something that you kind of have to experience yourself and just pick whichever one you like. There is quite a lot of variety, but it all depends on your playstyle. However, I do feel that certain talents, like the one I said before, like your parries become easier to perform, kind of become the meta of this game because of how powerful parries are. However, there are some talents that allow you to not only avoid but also dodge unblockable attacks and follow up with a powerful counterattack. And this counterattack talent really sort of doubled down on my particular playstyle because it allowed me to stay on the offensive throughout the entire boss fight. Even if I was on the defensive, I was still doing damage. However, if you are unhappy with a particular talent, you can always go back to the beacon or the hub and just simply change your talent build as much as you want, because there is no limit to how many times you can change. If you just want to change one talent point and put it in another one, you are free to do that as much as you want. And that's the great thing about this game. Now let's talk about the potions in this game, because they function very similarly to your Estus flasks or your blood vials from Bloodborne. So there are 3 potions that you will unlock throughout the game. The first one you will have pretty much from the get-go, and it functions like your really standard healing ability, where you just consume it and it heals you for a decent amount. The next one you will unlock is a fast-acting potion, or fast-acting injection more like. And this one heals you for less, but you have more of them to start off with. And the animation for using the fast-acting potion is, well, much faster than your first one. And finally, as you would expect, the third potion you will unlock is the strongest one. However, it does take a little while longer as compared to your other potions to use and to consume, but it does heal you for much more. Now, you can also buff each potion as well. So if you defeat bosses and mini-bosses, they will drop this sort of consumable, this sort of alchemical consumable, that when you go back to a beacon or the hub, you can then upgrade the amount of potions you have, how strong each potion will heal you, and by adding an additional slot to the potion. And what you can do is that throughout the game you will find certain herbs that you can mix in with your potion that will give you additional benefits. So for example, a certain herb might increase the amount of healing that you get, or the other one might generate energy every time you heal up. So it's all about sort of finding the right balance. And personally, I just went with the one that heals you the most and just fortified the healing by adding more healing based herbs into it, so that if I do ever reach a very low health, I just have to use the potion once to regain my full health bar. So you can already see how much there is in terms of progression in this game. There is a talent build, there are a variety of plague weapons, each with their own little progression. So potentially you have hundreds of different progression paths that you can go with. You then have your talent points and then finally your potions as well. Now, most people might say that this is just arbitrary and just basically adding a grind to the game, and I do fully agree with you on that. However, I do want to make a mention that it is not required for you to grind, because once you stick with a particular potion or a particular talent build or a plague weapon, by the time you finish the game, you will be maxed out on all of those options that you have picked. And to be honest, once you get used to the game and once you get really good at parrying, the bosses kind of become easy, to be honest with you. But for the first timers out there, if you're playing for the game for the first time and you're not used to the parry mechanic, oh boy, the bosses are very difficult. Hell, even the mini bosses or the special enemies are stupidly difficult. So let's talk about them. Well, when it comes to the enemy variety, the mini bosses and the bosses, I will be doing a follow-up video or a separate video where I'll be talking about just that aspect of Thymesia. And then I might even just rank the bosses, from S tier down to your F tier. But we'll see how we go. I wanted to keep this video relatively spoiler-free, or as much as I can, because let's be honest, no one came here for the story and no one really cares about the story for this game anyway. People want to know how the gameplay is and whether the boss fights are worth the amount of money that you will spend on playing the game. In conclusion, yes, this game is, in my opinion, definitely worth playing. It is fairly short at 8 hours, and a lot of those 8 hours were spent just sort of exploring the map, which is not a bad thing. However, I would have liked seeing a few more bosses, maybe 2 or 3 more bosses, and also having a system allowing you to fight each boss individually through the mission select system. But again, I will talk all about that in its own separate video, so make sure to subscribe, and as always, I will see you in the next one.